Hello and welcome to Inside the Recording Studio. I am Jody Whitesides. This is Chris Hellstrom. How you doing, Chris?
I'm doing awesome, man. How are you doing, Jody?
I'm doing all right. I'm not going to complain today.
Okay, good. We don't want to listen to it anyway.
Right. Screw that. Who wants to listen to somebody complaining about their health?
Shut
that's
up
an
and talk
entirely
about the
different
instruments and
podcast,
stuff.
damn it.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to start something today that should be funny for the listening audience, and that is a drinking game based on how many times we say content dependent or arrangement calls for.
Yeah.
Every time we say that, you need to take a shot of tequila or bourbon or whiskey or whatever it is you like to shoot and see if by the end of the podcast, you're not keeled over like in drunken fashion.
Yeah, so please listen responsibly.
That's right. Listen
and we'll try to act the part as well.
Very much so. What are we talking about today?
We're talking about bass today.
Bass?
Recording bass.
Is that bass? Bass.
Yes.
Oh, man. The funny thing, I just watched a video that must have been done in like 1979 or 1980-ish from like the Tom Schneider show or something of some weird nature in New York, where they interviewed Kiss.
Oh, that's an awesome
and they're
video.
Done up in their full regalia, and it's like, oh, it's hilarious. And Ace Frehley is just bombed out of his mind.
He is
bombed out of his mind. And he's talking about how he the show host asked Gene about playing bass.
Oh, really?
Yeah, as in like fishing.
Fish, yeah.
And so when he talks to Ace Frehley about, well, what do you play? And Ace just responds, trout.
Yeah, it's a classic interview. It's even if you're not a Kiss fan, and I read somewhere that Gene
that was the beginning of the end for them.
Yeah, and Gene was really, really gung ho about going on that show because he wanted to show what kind of an intellectual he was and how he could hold his own about these political discussions. And of course,
never went there.
Ace just grabbed the whole interview and ran with it. And it's awesome. You can see that there's a couple of really, really good looks from Gene.
Oh yeah. And Paul for that matter. It's like, you can see the split between Gene and Paul and then Peter and Ace. And it's you got Peter and Ace on one side of the screen where they're, I don't know if Peter was drunk, but Ace most certainly was. And then you got Gene and Paul who are like trying to be deadpan serious. And occasionally you see them lose it over something that Ace has said.
Yeah.
So pretty funny
shit.
That
was a classic one. That's a good one. So you're kind of a spaceman. No, actually, I'm a plumber. So, but anyway, we got off track early on. So
nobody got to take a shot yet, so we're good.
Right. So we'll try to let's see how long we can go without saying that. But we're talking about bass today.
Yes.
And
the instrument
bass, and we're talking electric bass, not stand-up bass today generally.
Well, I'm not sure we'll ever even get to stand-up bass, will we? Maybe we should just mention it. Is that that we're mentioning it in passing right now?
Right. There we go. No, we're
some
talking
episode
about,
years from now we'll have that.
Right. When both of us have a little experience of that to actually mention.
I've got some, just not that much.
Yeah. I have it because I have it as a sample instrument, but that's as far as it goes with that. But the same thing goes for, as we say in the beginning of all of these episodes, seems like, you got to make sure that your instrument is in working order. And what does that mean, Jody?
Well, it means that it's properly intonated. Strings are relatively fresh unless you don't change them for a year like myself. Or the string height is good.
Crusty pots or any of that.
No scratchy stuff unless you're really looking for that for horror movie purposes or something.
Right. So now these things should obviously go without saying, but we're probably going to keep repeating them anyway. So maybe that's another drinking game in the future.
How many times can you say this? Take a shot.
Right.
The other thing too, in line with the actual instrument in of itself, your amp that you use with it, if you're using one, should also be in good working order.
Sure. Yeah. Making sure, tubes and everything are changed. or at least reasonably fresh or not about to die on you.
Properly biased.
All that kind of
all
stuff.
All that stuff.
Yeah, again, techs are available to help you with that.
That's right. That's not our job.
Yeah. And not necessarily yours either, but you know, have it done. Other things, now we're going to have to tread lightly on this one because we're going to talk about what types of strings. So we're talking flat wound or round wound.
Yeah. I use round wound myself, but that's me.
Yeah, me too. Flat wound. That's difficult for me to say.
Say it 10 times fast.
Flat wound, 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 and flat wound.
Boy, it's a good thing that wasn't a rhythmic thing because you lost the beat.
I did, but we're talking bass, so yeah. Ooh, that's 15 seconds of the listener that will never get back in their life. But no, but it is a sound difference, obviously.
Yes. Generally speaking, round wounds, and this goes for electric guitars, I think we mentioned it there too, is that the round wounds will sound much more lively and punchy, whereas flat wounds will sound much more mellow and reserved.
Right. So, yeah. So, whatever this song calls for.
Is that an arrangement thing?
I think that's an arrangement
program
thing.
Dependent.
No, program
take a shot.
Take a shot, people. Well, obviously, yeah. I mean, there's to a certain degree, it's player comfort, whatever you're used to using. But if you're doing, now here's something else that we should bring up. It's like fretless bass. If you're playing fretless,
yeah, that makes a difference too.
Right,
especially when it comes to things of intonation.
Yes. Yeah, there's, I have to tell a really, really bad musician joke when it comes to that.
Is it a joke or is it a story and true to life?
No, it is most definitely a joke.
Okay, I'm ready to laugh.
And that is, what is the definition of a minor second?
You've stumped me. What is the definition of a minor second?
Two fretless bass players playing in unison. Bada boom.
Slap my knee and then snap it off.
Yeah, no, I told you it was bad. But that's something that, again, if you're playing fretless, maybe you have a preference. You want flat wounds for that to get less of the string noise type of thing, or things to consider. But I would say that when just going into the studio as an engineer, I would probably not tell anybody to change their strings.
Well, you would hope that if it's a session player, like say Nathan East, he's probably going to come with an arsenal of basses that has varying string gauges, string types, what have you.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm doing Nathan East, I'm not telling him anything. I'm just
set
listening.
it up and go, dude, just play. I'm ready to hit record and capture you.
Yeah. No, but let's say that somebody comes in and they're used to playing, I always play my flat wounds. Okay, then, unless it causes an issue with their tracking, I'm not going to make him change, right? Because it's that comfort factor. Now, I might suggest something like, hey, you're doing an awful lot of string sliding here. So unless you want to sound like Gene Simmons on Alive 1, you might want to cool it with, or maybe you want to consider trying a different type of string. But
you could also oil the strings, but that's a whole other thing there.
Yeah. So again, I would say overall there, if it's a sound that they want, it's something to suggest. But if the player's not comfortable doing that, then stick with whatever they're comfortable with. Or if you're the player, you might have some fun and try different things, but play where you're comfortable with. Which leads us into the next point. And this is a contentious issue for a lot of bass players.
And what is that?
It is, do you play with your fingers or do you play with your pick?
Yeah. If you play with a pick, you're not a real bass player, right?
Yeah, just like Paul McCartney and Carol Kay, right? Yeah.
I was playing bass not long ago in a rehearsal for a situation, and someone else was like, dude, you're a freaking amazing bass player. And I said, thank you. I'm not a bass player. And the drummer piped up and said, yeah, he's not a bass player because he's playing with a pick. Because I was playing with a pick. Now, can I play bass with my fingers? Most certainly I can. However, my fingers have these lovely fingernails on them that I like to actually keep in shape for playing acoustic guitar and nylon string guitar. So therefore, I tend not to use my fingers while playing bass. Otherwise, it chews the living bejesus out of my fingernails, and then they're gone, and I don't have them for my guitar.
Right.
So
well, there's that. There's also yeah, and there's also that if you have too much of a nail when you're playing with your fingers, that you can get that clicky kind of sound when you're playing that may or may not be desirable.
Sure.
So
I don't care. I'm perfectly fine with somebody playing with their fingers. I'm perfectly fine with someone playing with a pick, as long as they can play and play well and sound good.
Right. Yeah, that's the bottom line, right? You're not less of a bass player doing what. Let's pause for a second and edit the video. So there's a phone call on my end here. Call from Los Angeles, CA. It's probably somebody having to call me to give me an offer of something. Shut up.
Does it stop ringing?
Yeah.
Okay. Is it answering them now?
Yeah, but they're probably not going to leave a message. Okay.
All right. Fingers and picks. 20 things we share.
Right. So as long as they play well and being comfortable doing what they are. I've always been of the mindset that when I play bass, if I'm doing more of a rock thing, which is what I tend to do most of the time, I will more often than not play with my pick. Excuse me, my camera's falling a little bit here. I want to make sure that you let's see me. Sorry about that. But yeah, the pick is something that's obviously coming from a guitar player perspective, feels more comfortable. But it's also the sound for me. When I play, I get a lot more of the attack with a pick. So if I'm going for something that might be more of a mellower type of a thing,
mm-hmm.
I might approach that with my fingers. So that would be the only thing. But again, same thing with the strings there. If you're not comfortable doing one or the other, as long as you can play, I'm not going to make you,
You're not going to make them play? You should make them play. Always make them play.
Yeah, I always try to do that. And then I call somebody else to replace it. No, no, but
and that does happen in the real life of studio recordings out there in real life land.
Yeah. Let's not call out any names because.
Well, I'm not calling out names. I'm just saying it happens.
Yes, most definitely happens. So.
Well, once you get past the attacks of either your fingers or your picks, and you've let go of the anomaly of like pick players are not real bass players,
right.
What happens next? Where does the signal go?
Well, that is another choice, right? You either go your amp or DI versus, well, I tend to, if there's an option, if the player really has their favorite amp, I'll do that. But I also like to have a DI signal.
Yes.
But we're also talking possibly software versus a real amp.
Yeah. So amp or DI, let's cover that one first. So
sure.
Or why not both? There was a point in time where I was doing both for quite a while. Then I stopped.
Yeah,
I don't know why I stopped, but I did.
Yeah, I prefer doing both because I think it comes down to the mix issue where an amp signal can be really, really great in the room and you can, this sounds awesome. But in my experience, you might lose a little bit of clarity.
Losing clarity?
Yeah, in like note definition, that type of thing. And then if you have the DI, you can kind of balance those a little bit better and you can bring out certain things to give that. But
it's kind of like going back to the acoustic guitar thing.
Yeah.
You can get a little more clarity by using the DI signal, but
right.
Didn't really say that, did I? I said it now.
Said it now. No, but we touched on it, I believe. So, because you were talking about the certain mid-range when it kind of gives you certain things. Yeah. But, yeah, so it's almost, you can almost look like it, like having that DI is just a safety net for you if something goes awry or anything, but you still have that, and it does serve a function.
Yes.
I think sonically as well. So then it comes down to just, again, players' preference, what they like as far as like what kind of amp they have. If they have a favorite amp, if they have, an Ampeg or a Boogie or whatever they like to use, let's make that bad boy sound good. And
let's not forget like Hartke, Gallion Kruger, Aguilar.
No, of course, all of that, all the Edens of the world and all that kind of stuff as well.
Actually, they just make basses. I don't know if they make amps.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, so that, it comes down to a preference from the musician, but I, as a producer or recording engineer, would always recommend getting a DI signal anyway, whether you use it in the mix or not. It's a good idea to have it.
It's nice to have the option. Yeah.
Yep.
Definitely. So, do you have any favorite bass amps that you have worked with, or that you prefer, or have played through, or?
No, never having been an actual bass player with actual bass amps, I can't say that I have. I've never purchased a bass amp. Have I played through certain amps? Yes, I've played through an Aguilar. I've played through an Ampeg SVT with an 810 cabinet and those kind of things. They sound great for what they are, but not being an actual, like, this is my job as a bass player, I have never purchased a bass amp.
Right. No, I'm in the same category. I've done live shows for people and things and been reliant on whoever might have been in the back line and that kind of thing. And, so I can't speak too eloquently of the ins and outs of certain amps. That's up for somebody else to do. But
it is fun to stand in front of an SVT 810 and you're thinking these 10-inch speakers aren't going to do anything. And then you get hit by a wall of sound that is pretty darn deep and powerful and punching you right in the chest. And it's like, oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so, that just feels good, doesn't it?
But that's a whole different thing from actually recording it. It just is cool from a standpoint of live and standing there kind of thing.
Right.
In terms of, it's also gigantic. I mean, that thing's almost as big as me, an SVT 810. I mean, it's a good 5.5, 6. It's almost, well, maybe not quite 6 feet, but it's like 5 to 5.5 feet tall.
Yeah, I think, yes. Well, a little bit less than that, I think, but they're big beasts. Yeah. And they sound and feel good. Yeah, it's a great feeling. It's something about having your own frequency range too, to deal with it. It is pretty cool. Yep. So,
but then also too, it comes down to, are you playing 4-string bass, 5-string bass?
Yeah.
Apparently, how big do basses get now? 7-string bass? I mean, that would be kind of ridiculous.
I'm sure it's way more than that. Yeah. So, but do you need that? And while we're touching on that, I didn't necessarily think of this as a topic, but let's say that you want to go down to those low ranges, like bands like Korn and stuff like that. They have 5-string and they often tune down to the low string is an A, right?
Boom.
So, I get that really nice and fat thing. And the joke used to be that people that have those multi-string guitars or basses is that if you use tablature to write out their parts, it would look like binary code because it would be open one strings in the first fret, right? But if you're going for something like that, but you don't have, the funds or whatever to get let's say a 7-string bass or 5-string bass even, you might want to consider getting, if you have a spare 4-string bass set up with just heavier strings, get it set up for that, but have it tuned. So you essentially get rid of the G string and just kind of string it. So there are things like that. I used to do that on guitar when we used to play together for a while. I had a string or a guitar that was strung B to B. So
that was my fault because I was doing a lot of 7-string stuff.
You did. Yep. Yep, you did. But that is, excuse me again, I have to fix my camera here a little bit. Pardon everybody. But what was I going with that? Yeah, all the low strings and all this kind of stuff. It feels really, really good to kind of have that just pounding along. But that leads us kind of into software amps as well.
Yes,
just as we talked about with on the guitar episode.
And that's where I'm a big proponent of the software amps too, because now I have a whole plethora of bass amps and cabinets of which to go through.
Yeah, and experiment with and all this kind of, yeah. So what's your approach there when you do? Because I still like to have a DI track when I do that as well, to kind of blend those just for the sort of clarity and that kind of thing. And I like that sound of the bass or amped sound along with the DI.
Well, in terms of keeping a DI track, if you're tracking in Logic or whatever DAW it is, and you don't actually print the sound, but you're recording the direct bass, then you've already got your DI track right there.
Sure.
And but I mean, running it through
when it comes to, right, but I'm thinking about when you're coming to the mixing stage as well, because they're even, I know in Logic, which I'm a big fan of their bass amps actually.
Unlike their guitar amps.
Yes. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of those. But they have, DI boxes as an emulation in there.
Yep.
And running through those and blending that, I think sounds really, really good. So I think my point is there that the DI gives me an option that I always like to have, and I like to blend that along with
Americans love options.
Yes, I'm so Americanized now.
Even if they're not good for them, they still love them.
Yes, but that's a whole other topic, and we probably shouldn't go into that in this podcast. But which ones, when it comes to software, do you have any favorites that you like to use?
I tend to use the Logic ones quite a bit. I use the Pod Farm ones quite a bit. Pod Farm 2 bass amps. And much like the guitars, I turn the cabinets off and then use the Mix IR cabinets for their bass cabinets. Right. And choose the mics and such, because not unlike guitar, because the guitars can be fairly drastic, but the bass cabinets and bass amps, their tonality and their thump and their low end rumble and everything can change dramatically based upon the microphone.
Sure.
I mean, really dramatically.
Yeah.
Like the 4038, I think it is probably for low end, just girth. Happens to be, I think, my favorite microphone for low end girth, because whatever it accentuates in the low end just gives a huge enveloping bass tone. Now, It doesn't do much for the top end, but that's the low end. So sometimes I will actually take a certain frequency range for a microphone on one cabinet, and then I will use a second amp or a second cabinet with a different microphone for an entirely different range. So I'm capturing something from the low to the high using the things that are very good for each situation on a bass, because the bass becomes a whole different beast in that regard.
Yeah.
Compared to guitar.
Right. And yeah, I have.
And in terms of just like guitars, I prefer the software amps because you get a lot more variety and choices, so you can dial in as many tones as needed without having to buy a ridiculous amount of hardware to do it.
Right. Yeah. Well, that is exactly the same thing as when, we're talking guitar emulations versus actual amps, right? If you have, and I think I mentioned in that guitar episode, so unless you're Joe Perry or Joe Bonamassa and you get a museum of amps, right? Most mortals don't. So you're I'm a big proponent in knowing your gear, but if you have more options in the software world, you can certainly experiment more and get to something that might be more appropriate for, shall I say it? More appropriate for the song.
That's right.
That's right.
Have the arrangement, program dependent. Take another shot.
Cheers. So I do like those. Now, I don't know why it is, but I do like the Logic amps when it comes to the emulations. I've tried others, and I'm a really big fan of the Plug-in Alliance stuff. The Brainworks, their guitar amps. I think the Angle, I will never stop singing their praises. But when it came to the bass amps, they're equally as good, but I felt that I get the same kind of result from the Logic amps. So for me, it was one of those things. I was all ready to plunk down the credit card and get those, but I ended up doing the test. And again, not that they were bad, it just wasn't worth the investment for me to stray away from the Logic ones, which I do like a lot. Now, unlike you, I tend to go with the built-in cabinets with those as well.
You're weird.
So, I know, right? But but one thing too that I do like with that is in Logic, they have on the actual plug-in interface, they have the blend knob between the DI and the amp.
Yep.
And so I don't go through the process usually of duplicating a track and having that as a DI. So I can do that right there.
Do you know what I'd call that? That's called cheating.
It's cheating.
That's not real. That's not right. You can't do that. That's real, cheating. Man.
Yeah. Now playing with a pick and doing that.
Yeah,
I'm not even close to.
You're taking all the fairness out of the world. Stop it now.
Yeah, I'm not even close to being a bass player. No, but those are things that I like to do. And excuse me. When it comes to, one thing to consider, I suppose, but this is a little bit more in the mix section portion of it. But more often than not, than 999 times out of 1,000, the bass is going to be right down the middle. Right?
Well, yeah.
It's not a stereo instrument. You want it equally balanced.
Duh.
Well, you could experiment with things, but then I think it sounds...
Now you're going to be like the Beatles. You're going to have the bass on one side and the guitars and vocals on the other.
Yeah, man.
Why?
And these days, we don't need to do that anymore.
That's right. No more. Well, why not? Experiment. Have fun with it. See what you can do.
Absolutely. But so, you want that really nice, solid foundation there. And the other thing, not the only thing, but one thing to keep in consideration while tracking bass and where is it going to sit is, the main competition is the kick drum, isn't it? So
depends on your kick, but sure.
Well, yeah, but it also is depending on the arrangement.
That's
Cheers.
Right. Take another shot.
Yeah. But what do you want to be most prominent in the low end? Is it going to be the kick? Is it going to be the bass? That's something that you have to, figure out when you're going in for it. But
drop it like it's hot.
Yes, it's all about the bass.
According to Megan Trainor, anyway.
Absolutely, she did okay with that. I wonder if her bass player played keys or actual bass. I'll have to go back and listen.
Sounds like a stand-up to me, but that's just me.
I'll have to go back and listen. Yeah, so same thing as with guitar, I think. The software thing versus the actual amp, just different tools.
Different tools. Don't be afraid to use them.
Right. A lot of flexibility. And the
more surprising thing that most people wouldn't really recognize is that there's an awful lot of bass tones out there on recordings that is the direct signal and not some amped up, mic'd up thing.
Right.
So you can get away with the direct signal quite a bit.
Yes.
Unless, of course, you're doing things that require distortion and other things, and then often that sounds much better when you're amping or using an amp plug-in, either or.
Yeah, and even then, it's a good thing to try to use like a split signal. Blend those so that you can even
direct with the distortion,
right. And even having maybe just a certain part of the frequency spectrum going through the distortion and leaving maybe the low end really clean, so that it doesn't just woof out and become unintelligible.
Woof woof
in your track. Yup.
You hear that? That's my dog in the track.
Yeah.
Was that part of the arrangement? No, but take a shot.
Yeah. Now we're bordering on being irresponsible.
Yes.
Yeah. So the usual suspects. Make sure your gear's in good working order. Reasonably fresh strings. Consider if you're comfortable playing with both pick and fingers what's appropriate for the track.
Take a shot.
And then what? I stepped right into that. Amp versus DI, or both, preferably. I think we both agree on that.
Yep.
And if you have software emulations, use them and see what's going to work best for you.
Damn right.
Right. All right. So that's what I have on my list, Jody. I think that's going to do it for me. You have anything that you'd like to add?
Well, I think maybe we should try doing a sonic example on the website of a difference between using a DI signal and a amped type signal as well. Maybe we can do a little 2-minute Tuesday tip that goes along with all that talks about how to record some bass or how to put it into a mix.
That sounds like a splendid idea.
Yay for splendid.
Yes. All right, Jody. Thank you so much for today. You have a wonderful rest of the day in the recording studio.
Will do. So for all you out there and inside the recording studio land, we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening.